Well, good evening, good afternoon for some, maybe even for some good morning. I don't know in which time zone you watch this presentation. Uh, this is me, very short, but let's not waste much time on that. I worked a long time in process automation, a long time for one vendor, Honeywell in this case, and the last few years after my retirement, I retired in 2023, I became kind of a semi-retired person doing all kind of training jobs, primarily training jobs, not so much projects anymore. But let's continue. My presentation, well, I was asked to do the training. So I was thinking what type of topic would be of interest and what would fit in 1 hour. So I thought, well, let's keep it simple and use segmentation. Segmentation and zoning, they're not the same. We have something in ISA 62443 called the Zorn and Conduit diagram. They like to create that and use that for several applications. And yeah, it's still a little bit different from segmentation itself. And I will start explaining the small differences between the two. And then we'll go into examples. And my example segmentation will focus on areas close to the process. So the process control and safety system, safety instrumented system will be the focus of this presentation. Let me continue. So what should segmentation accomplish? Well, the first is the most logical, I guess. It should isolate the functional domains. Now we segment, for example, we segment the process control system, the process control environment from the business functions, what we call in ISA 62443 terminology level 4 from the process levels, level 1, 2, 3, or you maybe even can start at 0. So that's one function. Another function is more from a security point of view, that we try to make it as much the difficulty as high as possible. So if an attacker wants to somehow impact the process, we try to make that he has to cross as many zones as possible, many boundaries as possible, because every zone has a boundary, every segment has a boundary, and he has to break through that boundary to get to its target. So we do it to increase the effort, to make sure that he has to work hard to get in. We also do it to control the traffic in process control system. It's very important that we can guarantee real-time performance. And real-time performance requires that there are no delays, no latency that can impact the performance of the communication between controllers and operator stations, between controllers and all kind of servers. So when we can constrain the data paths, when we can constrain the communication within zones, we can better manage that performance. So another possibility, though from a security point of view, it's generally not that effective, but from a failure point of view, it can be, is to localize failures, to kind of keep the distance of failure can impact the whole system to a minimum. And when I talk about segmentation, I try to explain it now as much as possible from a network perspective, from a process control network perspective. But you can, of course, segmentation do in many ways. You can also segment the process in a way. If you have two process trains, you also kind of segment there's also kind of segmentation, and you have in a plant, you segment the plant in all kind of fire zones to localize impact. So segmentation is not only considering the network or the process control network, it can also and we'll talk about that later, segment the process itself or the units, on how you automate the units, how you control those. When you start segmenting, you can also, scale your security based upon a particular zone. One zone might have a more strict security than another zone, and that, well, having different levels of security saves you money, saves you complexity, and so that's another other reason why we like to do zoning. Important is that those rules are kind of maintained during all life cycle phases of the system. So operation, maintenance, engineering. There shouldn't be any situation where you kind of shortcut those zones, that you suddenly have a much bigger, more possibilities. How can we accomplish segmentation? Well, the easiest way is physical segmentation. We do that with separate hardware, separate switches, separate routers, separate equipment, cables, network interfaces. So in those cases, we do not have any shared traffic. When we start doing logical segmentation, well, we kind of use that same equipment, but now in a logical context. So we have one cable with communication flowing from A to B, but if we have two VLANs in the system, we have a logical communication that's more or less separate, because the broadcast domains, the Ethernet broadcast domains, are separate, so they can't see each other. A node in VLAN A cannot see a node in VLAN B, at least if we do not make provisions for that so he can see it. So that's the logical segmentation. We also have policy-based segmentation, so we can have all kind of rules and kind of keep equipment separate, protocol separate, based upon access control lists and firewalls. We can make differentiations on quality of service, so we can start prioritizing traffic. So one type of traffic has a higher priority than another one, which is important in process control. Because, for example, we like that the operator has always the highest priority, so that he can intervene whenever necessary and is not hindered by maybe a backup going on in the system. So we need to also prioritize traffic. And the most granular form of segmentation is micro-segmentation, where we actually have two nodes communicating with each other, and those nodes will only allow that communication to happen. So it continuously checks if it comes from the right source, if in the case of signed traffic, also if the messages have not been manipulated. Well, I'll come to that later. So these are the means of segmentation. So it's basically the kind of the strategy. How do we segment? The choices we make. Warning, I think that's important, because I've seen many. I worked, as I said, a long time for a vendor, and then you see a lot of things happening. People starting to make changes to the network. IT people coming into the network and say, hey, we can do this a lot more clever, and start making important changes that suddenly break down the system. In a process control system, there's a lot of different communications. I already mentioned Ethernet broadcast domain. There's broadcast traffic on Ethernet level. We also have multicast traffic very, very often for sending all kind of alarms and that type of information. And we have, of course, unicast from point-to-point type of communication. And all these traffic have their own demands on segmentation. If we talk about multicast, well, some protocols use level 2 type of multicast. For example, Goose protocol, very often used in the power environment. It uses level 2 segmentation. If you have Profinet, or I'm sorry, it uses level 2 multicast. If you have Profinet, it uses level 3 multicast. So if you suddenly start creating segments with a VLAN, then your COUS protocol will be limited to that VLAN if you do that. So all kind of things you have to be careful with when you start making changes. In general, I would say when you make a change to a system, to a process control system, always discuss that with your vendor. Otherwise, you might run into big problems. By the way, if I talk today about segmentation, my focus is DCS, Distributed Control System, not so much SCADA. Why DCS? Because it's the most interesting type of segmentation and communication. SCADA is less critical in some areas than DCS is. So how to accomplish segmentation? Well, we have these different methods. We have the differences they do. The one, no shared traffic. The other one, isolate broadcast domains. And the moment we have a VLAN, we split the broadcast domain. The other ones filter maybe by IP address or by protocol, TCP address. And microsegmentation that lives basically on its own between two nodes. And of course, it can be multiple connections using micro segmentation. So multiple differences. I'll skip some slides a little bit for time because I have probably too many slides and I need to make sure that I stop in time. So these are again these four methodologies to segment, and these are some of the pros and the cons and why we do it. And from all of these, I would say the micro-segmentation is the strongest, together probably with the physical segmentation. But physical segmentation is generally not enough to properly segment a network. So micro-segmentation really checks which source sensitive is the integrity of the message unchanged, and it does that with a signature that's encrypted or a authorization code that's encrypted. So what's the main difference between when I talk about segmentation and SORNs? Well, segmentation is the broad principle. It's how we create these boundaries. Do we do it with physical? Do we do it logical? Do we use microsegmentation or use policies? The SORNs are a more specific implementation. So when we talk about SORN and conduit diagrams, the IEC 62443, IEC, I should say, 62443, uses an asset-centric type of segmentation. It groups equipment that have similar security characteristics. It groups that together and makes that a zone. And then, of course, that zone gets boundaries, and those boundaries require security protection. So you start probably filtering access or monitoring, whatever you want to do with the boundary, but that's the idea. So you have a zone with in the ideology of, or the methodology, I should maybe say, though for some it's more or less an ideology. The 62443 is system-centric, hardware asset-centric segmentation, looking at security characteristics. And I will show later on, or discuss later on, there are different ways of looking at a system. And that doesn't say that one way takes away the other way. It is kind of a layered approach where this is asset-centric, system-centric is the base. You always need that. But you will see that other perspectives on segmentation will show you different problems or different vulnerabilities or different opportunities for the attacker. So you should not only look at segmentation from the asset-centric, system-centric perspective. That's basically the message I try to relay here in this training. The key difference between the two is that one is the overall plan or principle, the segmentation, the why, and the general how of dividing things up. And we can use different techniques for that. And zoning is one particular standardized way to execute that plan, like IEC 62443 does. So then we end up, if we talk about the traditional IEC 62443 model, we have zones and we have conduits. And the zones are the assets with the same security requirements. They're based on a specific role, sometimes criticality and exposure. Common examples are control zone, safety zone, historian zone. You can give it different names. Sometimes people use level 2 zone, level 1 zone, level 3 zone. That's also possible, but you can also make it smaller. And I will discuss, I think in the next slide, you can also have subzones that make things smaller. And then you also have conduits, and conduits connect zones. So you can have zone A and zone B, and the connection between those zones is called a conduit. And in a conduit, you have different, what they call channels, protocols, basically flowing there. In IEC 62443, we give security levels to each of the zone based upon risk estimate, what the highest, how you say that, the most riskiest zones should have the highest security levels. And that's the same a little bit with conduits. Only with conduits, we typically look at which security levels are connected by the conduit. So if you have a zone A is security level 2, zone B is security level 3, and you connect the two with a conduit, then you typically make sure that the conduit security level will not breach the higher level. Certainly not if it's bidirectional traffic. So if you have security level 3 or zone B, then probably it's best to have the conduit also security level 3, which can be an issue if you, for example, have in that conduit Modbus flowing. Well, segmentation, like we already said, is based on network topology. It doesn't really look at functional influence in itself. So I can have, for example, an operator station at level 2 in a supervisory equipment zone, and I can have a controller at level 1 in maybe a control zone. And those two work together, and you can have a beautiful boundary, filtering things, stopping things. But if the function allows that an operator modifies a set point in the controller, then that will happen typically based on trust relationships between those two nodes. So zoning is not really stopping that type of influence. And like the statement here says that functions typically reside in multiple zones. A very important parameter I will discuss later on when we come to control-centric segmentation is control proximity. And with control proximity is the parameter that measures the impact a particular function can have on the process. So if I have an operator station that has kind of the highest control proximity, because from there I can manipulate the valve, I can impact the process and do things. And a node somewhere else, like a domain controller, let me call that as an alternative, has a very low control proximity. It does not really directly impact the process. But some of our functions can be very high up in the system at level 3, and sometimes even I will show an example at level 4 that does have a high control proximity. So in those cases, I can actually manipulate, influence the process all the way from level 4 down to level 0 where the valve resides. So we also have subzones, and subzones are kind of a logical domain where the zones are more or less have very clear boundaries where we can filter access to and we monitor access. Subzones are very often policy-based restrictions. So I'll give you an example. I can have a zone, and in that zone I have operator stations. But I have operator stations in my console, in the control room, but I also have put an operator station in the supervisor office. And the control room is 24/7 guarded, 24/7 people in there. The supervisor room, probably not. The supervisor can walk away, can go to the coffee machine, can leave it unattended. So in those cases, you probably split that in another subzone where you have other security roles. Maybe you have in your supervisor subzone, you have a rule where you time out the display with your screensaver, so you have to log in again if it's for a while unattended. That's kind of an activity you probably do not activate in an operator station, because an operator needs to be quickly to its operator station. So you have different rules, and in subzones with different policies, you can kind of control that without making it a zone and having all kind of access control situations. So that's zones and subzones. And there are a lot of those things, and we're not always naming them because in the ISA 62443, there is a kind of a focus on zone and conduit diagrams and with a focus on the zone as a total. Well, if you look at a process system, you have a lot of subzones where you want to apply different policies. I come here with a really horrible diagram. It's kind of a zone and conduit diagram because you see zones and you see conduits, the lines in between. It's not very nice. I would not advise you to make a zone and conduit diagram like this, but it was easier for me to reuse it from another purpose, and I will show you later on discussions on where this control proximity can go all the way into level 4 and how you have to deal with that and how that impacts the zoning. So this is a kind of a small refinery. You find on the left side, you find all kind of level 4 functions from the ERP to the LIMS, the Laboratory Information Management System, various production performance zones where people can see how the process is actually performing. Also some engineering access, because some of the engineers might not want to walk all the way to the plant and rather do it from the corporate building. I'd rather have them walk to the plant, but okay, it happens a lot that they don't. And you might want remote vendor support. You might want to have remote vendor monitoring of particular equipment, or just for support reasons, availability. So that's level 4, and then you have the demilitarized zone in between. That's a security measure, basically. Functions that you make sure that communication lands somewhere in the DMC. It's not the idea that you route your communication through the DMC without that it touches any servers or functions there, security functions there. So it should land into the DMC. if you do data transfer, typically you land that into the DMZ, make sure that it is virus-free. And then you have the level 3, which is all kind of common functions for plant management. You typically also connect tank management in that zone, historization, various information functions, all kind of energy and material balances that you want to see and manage. You have process optimization, and your advanced process control typically resides with a server in the level 3 zone. Various asset management applications, production optimization. There are different options in this. And then level 2, that's the supervisory layer where we have the operator stations. I split it up here basically. We have 2 control zones. So we might have operators overseeing all the zones, and we might have an operator station, a local control or local control center station where it only looks at a small part of the process, maybe the Yeti or something else, in a smaller area. We have the engineering zone, I have a maintenance zone, and then level 1, it becomes more traditional on the safety zone, the control zones again, the diagnostic equipment zones for all kind of monitoring, vibration management, maybe that type of monitoring, and we have fiscal metering as a little bit on the side. Then most zone diagrams jump immediately to the right to the sensors and the actuators, the transmitters, the valves. I put group in there signal conditioning because there's a lot of signal conditioning happening in plants. Traditionally, these were just analog boards, just electronics. Then later on, it became digital. And nowadays, you see more and more that they even have network connections so that you can more easily manage it and make changes. But that, of course, creates risk. Happily, I haven't seen yet that this type of application is also connected to the process control network. Most often it's isolated, but it can happen that it's connected. So level 0 is signal conditioning and the field equipment. And this is what I've got about asset segmentation. Let me also watch the time a little bit. This is my first example slide. This is a very simple, small DCS environment where you have a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. And the level 1, I put some process controllers and some safety controllers. At the level 2, I've put some operator stations, DCS OPR operator station. I have nicely a control engineering station and a safety engineering station. I connected it all to one big, in this case, broadcast domain. The router switch on the top will split it up. That this is a separate Ethernet domain. It's not split. It's one single broadcast domain. That means that all the nodes can see each other, can communicate with each other, but also can disturb each other. If I have any traffic between the two safety ESDs, one safety ESD initiating a signal that another part of the system also needs to shut down. That's a kind of a multi-stage shutdown situation. Then that traffic is going over that level 1 access switch from A to B, and that traffic is fully, well, I don't want to say visible because the switch, of course, will split things, but it's accessible. I can disturb it. And the bad thing about broadcast domains, broadcast domain works with what we call the address response protocol, ARP in Ethernet. And ARP assigns IP addresses to MAC addresses. And MAC address is the Ethernet address. IP address is the layer 3, the OC layer 3 address, basically. And these two need to be connected, and the ARP protocol is doing that. It's kind of sending periodically a message, who is this IP address, and then one of the nodes need to respond, hey, that's me. And at the moment he responds, that IP address and that MAC address is connected. And you already feel a little bit that that's a little bit weak logic, because the most, the quickest response is the winner. So if I want to do wrong, I can kind of capture that IP address and create what we call a man-in-the-middle attack using what's called ARP poisoning, ARP poisoning. And that happens because of the broadcast domain. But this is the segmentation, level 2, level 1 segment. I put in some arbitrary addresses. I put in some ACLs, access control lists, that help me filter traffic. So basically on the level 3 router, I can filter incoming traffic from higher levels, from the DMC probably. I can say, okay, you are allowed to go to level 3, you're not allowed to go to level 2. I can already do that there. But I can do that also on a layer lower. At the level 2 switch, I can have an ACL saying, okay, you are allowed to get in. And you may reach the operator station or the engineer station, but you cannot reach the controllers or the safety controllers. So that I can do it at that level. What you see, there is no actually filtering, because there's no ACL on the bottom of this switch. No filtering between the supervisory side and the process control equipment side. And that is free traffic in this example. And why do I do that? I'll come with a slide to explain it a little bit better. I put in some extra firewalls here. Typically, most vendors do that. Most vendors have some firewalls, some distributed firewalls. And they do that because this traffic is very sensitive, but there's also a lot of traffic. If you look at a site, there is a lot of I/O in most plants, and a lot of messages, and it's really in this area where the real-time part is very important, because I can have control loops, and I can have control loops divided over multiple process controllers, so that I have a primary loop in process controller A and a secondary loop in process controller B, and that connection can be over the wire. It can be over the soft wire, let me say it like that. And that happens a lot, and certainly when you have a big plant with many places where you have controllers, multiple control rooms, multiple equipment rooms, let me say it like that, then that happens a lot, that there is a lot of traffic going on there. So there have been always people that say, okay, let's put a big firewall there, maybe between level 2 and level 1, or a firewall between the safety part and the process control part. Well, if you do that, you kind of reduce the speed and the performance of all traffic. And it's much better, and that's why most vendors look for that, to have distributed firewalls, that the firewall function not centrally, but at each of the nodes. Because at that point, if you have maybe thousands of scans per 5 seconds, let me not make it per second, but per 5 seconds, then you at least can only filter on the target and not every traffic at the same time. So from a speed perspective, from a real-time perspective, it's very important not to use in segmenting firewalls at that real-time level. To give you an example, you look at a refinery, a small refinery even, is already between 5 and 15,000 I/O. So I/O is analog inputs, digital inputs, analog outputs, digital outputs. So small refineries already a lot of points. And if you have flow measurement needs to be very fast because flow is very dynamic, just like pressure is a very dynamic signal. So you may measure that on a high sample rate, sometimes even a second sample rate or even faster. Where if you have a level measurement, that's much less dynamic. So then you can have lower sample rates. But there's a lot of flow inputs, a lot of pressure inputs in a plant. So they need very high sample rate, they need very good performance to make sure that the real-time functionality remains. And then 5 to 15,000 already a lot of points. If you see a large refinery, and specifically in the Middle East and some of the Asian countries, they like to buy, or how you said it, to build bigger and bigger refineries. Then you easily get over 100,000 I/O. And that's all still processed by that single DCS system. So you have to organize that properly. You have to segment it such that your communication is guaranteed. So you cannot have all your controllers in a single segment because that would make life also difficult. So you break up things, which is also following kind of the natural flow of where you put your process controllers. In a very big plant, you have probably multiple equipment rooms in the plant. Now, petrochemical is smaller, but still big petrochemical complexes can be quite big. And this is the reason why you should always be careful on these level 1, level 2 segments that you do not have too many filters in there. It's kind of a balancing between minimum privilege, what some of the ISA requirements ask, and the real-time performance of the system. ACLs delay traffic. ACLs create a latency, create jitter. Here I made kind of a small step. I kind of thought, let me, in this other example here, I still can have two zones. I have one segment, one broadcast segment. It can still have two zones. The purple and the blue can be different zones. In this case, it might be subzones where I have different policies. That is, but in this case, I have more. I have the same split in subzones, but I give it a little bit more possibilities in making differences because I put them in different VLANs. That means that I can better control my traffic in there. I can have different storm control settings. I can have different quality of operating, quality of service settings. And with quality of service settings in the network, I can prioritize traffic. So I can make operator commands have a higher priority than process alarms. And for example, in the lowest priority could be my other traffic, which could be backups or whatever. And there are in a Cisco environment, you have 88 different priority levels, but that depends a little bit on the type of equipment you use. But it's important. It's important that if I start suddenly a backup of an operator station or a DCS server, which is not shown here in this picture, that I do not kill my real-time performance. And that's done by quality of service settings. And that's also a little bit done by making sure that your segments are not too big and you can still control them with all kind of different settings, either at port level or VLAN level. That's too much detail in that. And then I have two big examples. I have this diagram and I have this diagram. And now you can question, does it really make a difference from ISA in security level? Did I accomplish anything here with using VLANs? well, I accomplished, of course, that I could have different policies applied. I can have much tighter storm control settings in my safety zone compared to my control network zone, compared to my control zone. I could have also done that by having two switches. You have a separate safety switch, not having a different VLAN, but having separate switch for the safety equipment. I could enter my storm controls at that level and make a difference. Here I did it with VLANs. So what is the difference from a security level perspective? We have in ISA the 3.3, 6244333. We have the various security levels and various requirements. Well, the requirement that discusses segmentation is the requirement 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4. I'll not go into it from a time perspective. I go very quickly, but all of this segmentation you've shown so far meets security level 3. It doesn't meet 4. Why? Well, that's explained here at the bottom. It requires a logical and physical isolation of critical network, and it requires physical separation to prevent shared failures. So I cannot meet that with my VLAN split zone. I would really need an extra switch pair to do that. The same thing with the next requirement. I easily match security level 3. I can do all of that, but I cannot promise a fail close in this environment. So that's why it's not there. I'll share the presentation with the organizer. So I don't know, they might share it with you, or so you can read it in more slow version. But also 5.2 doesn't meet security level 4, it meets security level 3. When I say, by the way, security level 3, it doesn't mean that the SON meets security level 3. It's only on this requirement we meet security level 3. Yeah? We also have in total, we have 7 foundational requirements, and we can fail in all the other 6 categories. This is, and we probably do in many cases, but this is the one for relevant to segmentation. So we do have 5.3, general purpose person-to-person communication. We don't use that much in our environment, so all these tools are generally stopped, all these function services blocked. But there are some exceptions sometimes by some vendors with particular built-in messages, and they're seen as exceptions and allowed. But at 5.3, but then also at 5.4, we do fully use the same, the security level 4. Important in this case, application partitioning, is that we do not install the sys and the control engineering tools on the same hosts. Some people like to save some money, buy one desktop, and install all the engineering tools on a single engineering station. Well, in that case, you kind of violate this BPCS sys separation, because a hacker could access that engineer station, and from that engineer station, it might compromise both the control system and the safety system simultaneously. So, roughly speaking, both have security level 3. This is the overview. It didn't make a difference, that segmentation, but it still makes a difference if you look at it one layer higher, if you're going from a system-centric view to a control-centric view. Then you will see that another standard will start demanding other stuff, and that you have to consider, and maybe also consider in the way how you segment your system. Well, control-centric segmentation looks at different parameters, how you say that, different considerations to determine segmentation, where asset-centric was using this cyber security characteristics, control-centric segmentation uses to control authority, control proximity, safety independence, that type of stuff, dependency, hierarchy, coordination, risk. So I still have 10 minutes. I think, yeah, should be able to end it in this tempo, but there are a number of different criteria we use to check the system. Well, one of the most important standards in any process control system, at least in my world of process industry, the refining, the petrochemical systems, is the IEC 61511. If you're having a train, how you say that, an OT system that controls the train traffic or other type of processes, nuclear, you probably don't have the 61511. You have your own specific standard. And this one is very specifically for the process industry. And that also addresses security. And I have taken out the 4 clauses that are most important, most directly addressing security. And we're going to discuss a few of those. Let me start with this situation. I already mentioned architecture A and architecture B differ. In architecture B, I have one broadcast domain. Architecture A, I have basically 2 broadcast domains. Each VLAN has its own broadcast domain. That means that the traffic in VLAN of the control system cannot influence the traffic in the VLAN of the safety system. While in the bottom, in the B architecture, that can be the case. I can have ARP, which they share, and I can kind of create this man-in-the-middle attack. The router, that is kind of the thing you have to understand for VLANs. The moment you have a VLAN, you need to route between VLANs. So if there is a need that the DCS operator station sees the status of the safety ESD, so it needs to communicate, then I have to route that traffic. And that traffic is routed in this case by the router switch on the top. So that's kind of a disadvantage. And you would never route real-time traffic in principle because that delays traffic. But in this case, it's okay because it's not a highly critical traffic. What you do with the connection between the DCS operator station and the safety station is typically monitor the safety status, maybe have some additional information from inputs from the safety system, and you might, in some cases, want to override some safety instrumented functions temporarily for maintenance. Though some other customers, some other asset owners, they select the safety engineering station to do that, but there are also asset owners that operate that from the operator station. And that's possible, and you can even properly protect it with all kind of time windows. And so that's a possibility. But for that, you need to route that connection. And that, of course, creates delays. But you do separate it. So in the top one, actually, what I'm doing now here is showing a way to properly separate the sys communication from the BPCS communication. I didn't do that in this environment. And in this environment, I do that by entering a new network called the safety network. Some companies call it SafeNet, others call it safety network. There are all kinds of names for that, depending on which vendor of the safety control system. But it's kind of a separate network, and all the connections between the two between the safety functions is going over this safety network. So a safety wire and gas, which detects maybe fire in some place of the plant, or a dangerous gas, which might want to trigger a shutdown of a particular part of the plant. So it might want to signal a shutdown activity. And that type of signal is going now over the safety network, where in the previous architecture it would go over the shared environment, BPCS and safety, which is a more risky, from an attack perspective, more risky. The bottom architecture is going even one step further, bringing the safety engineering station also on the safety network. This is typically always giving problems because you have to maintain the safety engineering station. You want to have also antivirus software in there. You want to you need to do security maintenance on that station, and it's kind of more difficult if it's on an isolated network. What you can see, this safety network is fully isolated from any other system, which on the top is not the case. In the top, I can still manage it, can still centrally distribute the AV signatures to that. So that's kind of a risk decision if you want it yes or no. If you say no, then it takes a little bit more work to maintain it. And you have again firewalls on these nodes. Very often these are not today. Let me say today is are more software-based firewalls. Where in the older generation it could be a separate distributed firewall, physical one. And some people don't like physical or don't like software. They want to have physical, but typically the software ones are better from a security point of view because they have more filtering options and better segmentation. This is another issue. It only comes up with a control-centric segmentation view. When you look at a hazard and you look at a particular hazard that maybe a valve fails open, maybe I have some tank filling mechanism with a valve filling the tank, and if that fails open, then of course that fluid is coming into the tank continuously, so it might overfill the tank, and in the hazard you will find that it will detect that and it will initiate some mechanism to prevent that overfilling. And sometimes you find in hazards that they look at or they take credit in their in the LOPA analysis. LOPA is the methodology that determines which and how many. I have to go very quick. Which and how many safety barriers you need. That they take credit for the operator alarm, and you cannot do that according to this statement in the 4. Let me go very quickly now because I have only 2 minutes. You can also start segmenting along data-centric, service-oriented, so segment data sensitivity or a particular service function, various things. For example, here you have a LIMS server in the top where you have a client, and the client puts the data into the LIMS server. The LIMS server connects to the LIMS broker to the APC server. The APC server provides its value to the DCS server. The DCS server provides its value to the process controller and makes some modification to the set point. This creates a situation where the control proximity is really up here in level 4, because if I do a bad value in here, if I manipulate that value, I create a problem. I showed it here in a little bit more detail. All the way, we have the product quality, we have the quality measurement data coming through from step up over the various jumps. We go from for the 20 milliamp to a signal conditioner, and the signal conditioner will kind of create the pressure for opening and closing the valve, and that will be the output signal. Now, all of this you can basically hack. You can start manipulating the data here, and that will then more or less automatically through trust relations end up in an open valve. But under the way, you can also attack and even have more possibilities than that. The last one, very quickly before I'm kicked out, risk-centric segmentation. You can also start grouping based upon the hazard. So some systems are so important. For example, if you take instrumentation error, that you want to isolate it. You might not even want to connect it to the network, because if you be able to switch off instrumentation error, the whole plant will kind of stop. So some systems you might willingly not connect to any network, so you segment them fully isolated. So these are the segment perspectives I briefly touched upon, from asset, data-centric, control-centric, risk-centric. Here I kind of given the principles again in a summary, and here is my end. I'm sorry that I had to speed up very much, but yeah, 1 hour.
Thank you so much, Sinclair. It was very informative. We have received so many questions from our participant. I will share it with you via email, and you can send me the response, and I will
Yeah,
share them individually with this participant. Thank you so much.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Now I would like to ask Paul. Hi, Paul. Thank you, Paul. I'm
Hey,
giving you. Uh, could you please share your screen and let me know if there is
yep.
any issue?
All right. I think we'll just get started. I do want to thank Sinclair. It was a great presentation. It does dovetail nicely into some of what we're going to talk about today. So the way that these two presentations were positioned, it was very advantageous. So my name is Paul Veeneman, ITOT Risk Cybersecurity, and about 28 years or more in a balance of industries. I work with various industry groups, so chapters of International Society of Automation, the Information System Security Association, InfraGard, which is a public-private partnership with the Department of Homeland Security here in the United States, supporting critical infrastructure. And then also the North American chapter lead for the OT security professionals group as well. A lot of my experience comes from the IT side to OT. I said I've been in critical infrastructure in OT systems probably for the last 8-9 years, and was brought in there via third-party engineering firm. So I understand a lot of that third-party risk, because my organization was a VP of operations, participated in some of those. Kind of we would be like a threat vector, so supporting the SCADA systems, PLCs, field level devices, network communications, et cetera. And that was supporting 3 of the largest Class 1 railroads in the United States, Norfolk Southern, Burlington Northern, and Union Pacific. And then that moved into oil and gas water, wastewater, et cetera. So let's take a look at the session agenda here. So we'll kind of skim through a lot of the asset management basics, which again, as I was alluding to, are going to feed kind of back in, if we're going to say a feedback loop, into some of what Sinclair was talking about. I'll not be getting into too much of the Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture or the levels, because we're going to be taking a look at building out and rounding out a sound asset management program that will allow us to know what our assets are and then become a little bit more process asset centric, as Sinclair in one of those last slides was talking about those different levels, those different centricities there. Then we'll take a look at the scalability and visibility problem within OT asset management. Maybe take a look at the Middle East, North America region. Like, what are some of the security drivers? What's the marketplace look like? What's below and beyond the Ethernet? And then talk about improving scalability within the asset management program, kind of pulling things together, and what stakeholders, decision makers, and different asset owners, process owners, and IT folks can derive from that. Then we'll take a look at some conclusions and then some Q&A if we've got time. I think we've got the question section open, and I've got that up to the side, so I'll try to keep an eye on that as we go, and then answer those in line. I'll also try to be mindful of time here as well. So the first stop we're going to do is take a look at, a lot of us are in the security space or cybersecurity space, maybe getting into the cyber physical, maybe presiding over OT, and perhaps maybe coming from more of an IT-centric background. And when we're talking about asset management, it's really kind of that data versus process or asset orientation. And so on the information technology side here, we've got this quote from IBM. Identifiable component, hardware, software, data, or service owned or licensed that has value to the organization. But on the operations side, we're looking at assets, and assets as they relate to processes or systems, and those are value to the organization that directly affects the bottom line. We talk about productivity and uptime, especially in areas such as manufacturing and energies and utilities, typically associated with this real-time and event-driven functions. So it's a bit of a mindset change. And a lot of times when I'm speaking with folks, whether it's at a webinar, a seminar, or doing a training session such as this, there's a balance of folks that have come from that cybersecurity side, or maybe have an IT background. I tell them you have to start shifting your line of thought, and we're not so much protecting individual components like a workstation or a server, although you can have engineering workstations, the crown jewels inside the OT environment for sure. What we're looking at is protecting a process, and a process is made up of components within there, whether it's historians, SCADA systems, distributed control systems, PLCs, RTUs, HMIs, and all balance of acronyms that we've come up with within the industry. So and this is what we're going to talk about, is assets that make up a process, and then really protecting those processes and managing those assets in order to do so. So what does an asset management program attempt to do? There's actually an article, and I think it was from 2023, and speaking of Sinclair, that he wrote, and it was published on Industrial Cyber. If any of you, I imagine a balance of you are probably following industrialcyber.co as well as Anna Ribeiro, and I would recommend, if you're not, that you should. And improves the website. And Sinclair is actually a voracious writer and posts a lot of articles out there. But actually, he had resilience and robust OT program structure, and we're going to pull some of that from here. When we're talking about asset discovery and inventory management, first and foremost, it's the ability to identify and catalog those OT assets, right, both physical and virtual, to gain a comprehensive understanding of that OT environment. One of the reasons that we're doing that is because those assets, as we just mentioned on the previous slides, they make up part of what that process or that system is. So it's very valuable to be able to understand what you have. Of course, the old adage is, if I don't know what I have, then I don't know what to protect, right? So there's also the configuration management. So threats and risks to a process come in a variety of forms. There's certainly the threat actors, the ability to infiltrate a system and to be able to manipulate data. But there can also be inadvertent configuration change. Could be changing a VLAN, change a rule on firewall, or it could be something further down. It could be a misconfiguration. Maybe there wasn't any peer review of the logic change that was happening maybe at the OT or the system or the process control level. And it has an unintended or inadvertent effect, and it wasn't a malicious actor, it was just human error. So configuration management is very prudent, but we want to know exactly everything that we have. That also leads into vulnerability management. So what are the assets that we have? We all know it's a lot of legacy assets within existing control systems or processes. How are we going to take a look at those? Are we going to be able to handle vulnerability management from a patch and maintenance upgrade point of view, bring things current? There are going to be assets and vulnerabilities that maybe are end of life or out of support, but the value of the asset to the production processes or the system has more value than the replacement. So then part of your vulnerability management is actually compensating controls and other security to be able to keep a cover or a shield, if you will, around those aging or legacy assets. So change management, similar, or patch management in a similar focus where we patching, how is that taking place? Change management is derivative of configuration management, but that can also be a higher order within the organization. It could be things that we're doing in a broader focus that could have downstream impact, not just the change or the configuration management of the assets, but also change the organization that has an impact to the process. Something as simple as bringing a new facility online that maybe is going to be part of a distributed control system, like in the case of a water district, or maybe it's a portion of a build off of an existing wind farm or solar farm area. Or it could be something like the acquisition of an organization, and we're going to start blending processes with that merger or that subsidiary acquisition. And then all this kind of rolls down to, as we see here, risk management, being able to identify at various levels. If I don't have an asset management program or an AMP that really successfully pulls all of that data together, then how is it that I'm making risk determinations for the organization, maybe within my own portion of the not to misuse the term, but the process, and how am I sifting or distributing that information to other stakeholders? And we'll talk about identifying risks and through the asset management program and how that information can be used effectively towards investment, improvement, and profitability. There was recently, here is an OT asset management quote from Verve on what OT's asset management is: a constructive guide, maps and acts as a compass or a flashlight guiding towards secure and resilient OT environment. And I think that's probably as comprehensive a statement as could be made as to what we're really looking for from an asset management program overall. When we take a look at the process, the asset management process within, this is pretty straightforward. If anyone has seen any of my presentations in the past, I've used this over the last couple of years, off and on, part and parcel. So pretty basic, is pretty high level, right? So identify scope, gather information, be able to create that asset inventory and asset classification, asset groups based on priority and criticality, to operations, maintenance, and updates. This also blends into eventually a lot of your risk analysis and risk assessments, and then getting into your life cycle management, which is where if we have an idea of what our processes are and what those components are that make up a process down to the asset, then we're able to pull all that together and then properly maintain, update, and replace, if possible, components over time. And then finally, documentation reporting. And we'll kind of get into Documentation is point in time that a lot of times can be part of a current asset management program that may be deficient, or reporting that could be coming from a real-time and accurate information that's more of a tool or a service or a system or a subscription or a piece of software that an organization or a department invests in. And down at the bottom, I think it's a quote that I've used time and time again from our colleague Ralph Langner, who is a staunch advocate, to put it lightly, for asset management, also as OT base, and recently did if anyone saw it last week, you can go track it down on LinkedIn, but had a presentation, a live stream that now you can see the recording, following CISA's release of an OT asset management documentation. He kind of goes through and takes a document, part and parcel through different areas and in different sections, and kind of explains those. And I think there's a lot of good information that he provides in terms of, how you can scale asset management or asset management program effectively. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It certainly doesn't have to be an arcane mysticism, as sometimes is put forth. But yeah, so without relevant data and OT asset management, security considerations and conclusions that are drawn are nebulous and arbitrary. And that was a quote from one of his presentations that he gave at S4. So, and that statement has always kind of rang true for me when we're talking about asset management, or at least the process and gathering information and how we're making decisions for the business and the system that is contributing to the mission and objectives, and at the end of the day, profitability or service to a community. So in the case of water, wastewater, or energy, renewables, etc. So then when we look at the risk assessment process, so again, high level, as we're able to gather information about our assets. And again, this is a slide that I've used over the last couple of years. If anyone's taken a look through ISA IC 6443 3-2, you've seen this. And this is the first first run through of being able to go through the risk assessment process for a system or an asset, identifying the system under consideration, being able to prioritize the risks to the OT process environment, perform that initial risk assessment, and a risk based on potential impact, partitioning those zones and conduits as Sinclair had described, or was the balance of the presentation that he gave ahead of this one, and then document and update those cybersecurity requirements. Now, what we'll want to do is kind of keep this idea in the back of our minds as we're going through a lot of the next few slides after we get through kind of an analysis of the Middle East and Northern Africa region. Because in order to do that, as I mentioned earlier, in order to get to that risk assessment, we really have to understand what our processes and our systems are down to that asset level. So within that region, what are some of those OT security drivers, right? And so in region, we have a digitization and modernization effort. Critical infrastructure sectors in the Middle East, such as oil and gas, energy, and manufacturing, are undergoing rapid digital transformation. So that's going to start pushing a lot of expansion, especially at the system level or networks, applications, systems, services. I think we're seeing a lot of this. There's an expansion within the industrial sectors. There's a lot of dollars that are being driven into that. The UAE has the industrial strategy that's bringing about within region a lot of large scale products, including smart cities, mega infrastructure, and diversified manufacturing hubs. So we're seeing a lot of this, and in time gets influenced, right? So we're trying to speed forward. We're trying to augment, an industrialized area, that digitalization or digitization that's taking place. Sometimes we have cybersecurity and risk that is a bolt-on after the fact. And as much as we would like to be secure by design in the front end, a lot of times that doesn't take place because there is such a rapid growth that is going on within an area. Even within the OT cybersecurity and risk, let's say the consulting arena, in talking with other colleagues, we do see like there's a lot of growth, like let's say even outside the US. So in other regions of the world, we're seeing that explosion, which is what these numbers represent and what we're seeing. So the next one is new energy projects, significant investment in renewables, and with advanced power stations. Regional infrastructure is considered, high value targets. So as you start to have these initiatives and these endeavors and these opportunities for growth at that critical infrastructure level, we're simply adding to the number of threat vectors or risk elements that would exist for that critical infrastructure. So if you, there's an adage that said, if you build it, they will come. Well, that also applies to the threat actors. So if I build such a thing and I don't secure such a thing, then it's going to become a target, and it will become, it'll have its vulnerabilities that could potentially be exploited by an external threat actor. And there's limited visibility. So whenever we have that rapid growth, and we'll start to get into what some of those blind spots are, but we have those rapid growing numbers of assets can cause a lack of visibility in the OT and ICS inventories, which creates risk for those blind spots. We see the reciprocal of that growth within the critical infrastructure, and it shows itself in the monetization, right? So within the security market alone in region, through projections 2018 and through 2030, we're going to see billions of dollars coming in into that area. So we do see it as an active market. There's opportunity for improvement. And it is good to see that the market is following from a cybersecurity risk perspective the growth in region. I think it's going to be important, though, that we are prescribing and identifying practical ways. And that was kind of the presentation, and what we'll be talking about here is what are the practical solutions. Investment without direction can be a loss of value on those investments that an organization would make within that security marketplace. And then we do see, some of the most lucrative services segments in the fastest growth area, and a lot of it's on the consulting or the services side. So if that would be your third parties, consultants that are taking a look or doing assessments, trying to assess or help individuals or organizations fill in the gap, find those blind spots, and be able to augment their overall OT, IT security risk programs, which the asset management program is a part of. But this gives us a pretty good snapshot, at least at 2023, 2025, and then looking at towards 2030 as to what the response is to that growth that's taking place within critical infrastructure within the Middle East and Northern Africa. So let's take a kind of a little bit of a scenic overlook here and kind of see what the scalability and visibility problem would be in asset management. So a lot of times it's the scale of things that are the challenge. So we have facilities where there's a smaller facility, or maybe a smaller concern. It's a small manufacturing operation, not very big at all. Maybe it's 1,000 or less IO. Maybe it's 1,500 or less IO. There is the opportunity where the investment in asset management could be whittled down. So and that's more along the lines of just documentation, spreadsheets, and it is we see that, and we'll talk about that later as we look at the tools. But distributed water facilities could have hundreds of OT assets. Solar and wind can occupy vast spaces. Um, and oil and gas facilities can have massive amounts of numbers. In fact, Sinclair had shown like even a even a modest oil and gas or a refinery can have in the tens of thousands, and you're not gonna be able to check those manually, right? So there has to be some sort of automation at the asset program, or at least the asset identification and discovery level, where you can pull all of that data in. And manufacturing could have a broad mix, right? So we talk about water and wastewater, solar and wind, oil and gas, and then manufacturing, dependent on what the organization is manufacturing. These can be all over. All over the gambit. It could be different sizes, and then there could be inorganic growth, where a manufacturing organization acquires other smaller manufacturers that are in their space. Um, and then what does that look like on the other side? Well, most asset management solutions, as we're trying to pull together that data and maybe at scale, we're trying to get as much information as we can to make good decisions. As I'm seeing some of these questions come in, I'm going to try to answer these in line. So could some of this be used one for one for IT asset management too? Yes. So what we'll talk about is some of the asset management tools that are out there actually work on both sides, right? So they start out at that network level, that IP discovery, which inherently kind of has a blind spot when you're talking about the field bus level. Is this OT security applicable to the Purdue model only? No. So I think it's important to recognize that while the Purdue model is used for cybersecurity, because it's got levels, right? And the OSI layer has levels. So we've got physical data link, network, transport, session presentation, application. And it's a natural to be able to see the different levels, 0, 1, 2, 3, 3.5, 4, 5 for the internet. And we're able to see a lot of these different levels. And it's natural to say, okay, well, if I have levels, I put in, firewalls here and there, and I set up access control lists or VLANs or switches, and it is useful. But it's very important to recognize that the Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture was initially intended to be ISA 95, and it's the systems integration for for process. So it's how systems will be integrated, what those dependencies are, where those dependencies exist. And for the ISA 99 group, it was already available for them to be able to affix certain components or certain elements of the ISA 62443, which Sinclair also identified, to some degree within his presentation. But it doesn't have to be. So if you use the Purdue model as kind of a starting point, that's good. But really what we're trying to do, and I've got a slide that takes a look at this, what we're trying to do is protect processes. And we'll talk about what that means as we're working up through a kind of a stack, from process to configuration to diagram. So let's see here, Mr. Vincent. Can you please let me know your thoughts on the nuclear industry asset? So it's interesting when we talk about nuclear. So nuclear is under regulatory, and so there's a lot of other nuances that go on there, probably to put it lightly, very lightly. So there would be situations within nuclear, because from a safety perspective, so right, safety, productivity, and reliability. So safety first. It's going to be different than manufacturing. Now, within a manufacturing operation, every organization would really like the fact that we have a timely response to any type of event or incident that takes place. But we certainly have for nuclear, we would have different situations, like as an example. So if I have multiple parties, multiple third parties that are supporting systems internal to operations within a nuclear facility, I may be in a situation where I am not changing passwords, or I am having shared passwords as more of a function of partially securing access and access control, but I need speed of access to the system as something needs to take place. So if I had control systems and I had management and workstation and engineering access to that, and I've got multiple parties supporting that, do I want to be spending time to figure out when the last password change was, and if other third parties didn't get those password changes, and whoever's on call for that, minutes to seconds probably to milliseconds matter when you're talking about nuclear. So the industry is always very specific. I think when we get to where we're on the far side of the spectrum, when you talk about nuclear, it's always important to take some of those ramifications into consideration, and you'll have a lot of different kind of, as I had said before, nuance to that. So in field bus connected assets and devices, often unseen or unmonitored. So as we're looking at those data, those asset inventory solutions that are connecting things based on the IP network, and we can pull in not only IT but also OT assets that are directly connected to the networks. We can create some blind spots, right? So the cybersecurity teams potentially miss downstream PLCs that may be connected via other real-time protocols below that Ethernet layer. This blind spot introduces operational safety or productivity or reliability of information risk, especially for decision making, or as we were just talking about in terms of incident response, timely response to something. So business and investment decisions. If I don't have all of the asset information, if I'm not pulling that together, but I'm giving presentations to, let's say, executive management, leadership, directorship level, or maybe even a board, am I giving them all of the information to make sound decisions based on an investment with the criteria that we have available? So, and then down at the bottom is a quote actually from that CISA article that Ralph Langner referenced in his in that real time, and now that video that's available as OT asset inventory, organized, regularly updated list of organizations, OT systems, hardware, and software. The key element there is regularly updated, right? So the consistency and the reliability and the accuracy of the information that we're looking at is most important. Now, let's chat about what's below the Ethernet. All right, so the field bus, a group of protocols that are commonly used in an industrial environment to encompass automation, smart instruments, field, human interfaces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this was in 2023, still holds true today. So we have, with our proverbial iceberg, is above the waterline, we're seeing what is visible to most OT asset management solutions. Below that, we've got potentially invisible unless tapped or engineered or queried through a PLC and an HMI. So we can get into, you can have serial taps. There's an organization, their name is Synalytica, and they have serial taps where you can pull back that information. But probably what we're seeing in the industry are tools and solutions that are able to acquire a PLC over the IT network or the IP network, and then interrogate, that's probably a strong word, or at least query or investigate for anything that's downstream that's connected along the bus, but communicating over non-IP networks. Could be, as we see below the waterline, could be Profibus, could be Modbus RTU, could be ControlNet or DeviceNet, but these are not going to be your IP network types of communication. It's going to be below that line or adjacent to it. And here we make that transition from security to risk, because I can pull back all the information from IP connected networks, right? And then I can funnel all that data into my asset management. I can do vulnerability management, patch management, change management, configuration management, but I'm doing that with a subset of reduced information or inaccurate information. All right, so sorry about that, flip screens. So what we want to do is make one is as we're starting to look across all the asset layers, we're now able to start moving into the risk identification, risk assessment, and risk management, which is really where we want to get, because it's going to determine what activities that we decide, activities or investment or tasks or resources that we deploy to maintain the safety, productivity, and uptime and reliability of our systems. And if we talk about going beyond Ethernet, so, and I was looking at this as I kind of tried to visualize what takes place, at least in my history of working with control systems engineers, identifying process control systems, being able to design, so bid build design, and kind of what we were doing years ago for the class 1 railroads. It always started with a customer conversation about what it is that they were trying to do. And there'd be these process flow charts that the engineering team would make, these very elaborate Visio documents. And then what they would do is move that up, and that started to go in different directions. It could be the PNIDs, the MEP one lines. You would see a lot of Autodesk documentation, and then eventually it would get to either ladder logic, function block, whatever the code was that going into the PLC, but they would map to that. What's interesting is the IT department ultimately ended up with the comms, which is that top layer, but we really didn't know anything that was below that. And so there was this inherent disconnect. And so what we eventually started doing was having the IT counterparts participating, and at least having view of the documentation that was below, so that there was an understanding of this is what is connected at the network level. These are the Ethernet connections that will be taking place on site. But here's the system that is attempting to automate the processes, and these are the components, and this is some of the logic that went into that, so that we could understand what it is we're trying to protect, what's the process we're trying to protect, and what are we trying to see. So we have these process diagrams at the lower level. We have the flow loop one line, or the system block diagrams at that level 2. And then level 3 eventually becomes how is all this connected, that gives us access, or it's connected to the SCADA systems, DCS, historians. It's basically all that digitalization that we were talking about, that modernization before. Then in items 1 and 2, valuable to operations and engineering piece of intelligence, but maybe outside the purview of the security personnel. I think it's important that if risk and security personnel are going to be protecting something, that they really have a clear understanding of what's there. In fact, in this stack of books, we've got practical security, we've got industrial automation, but down here at the bottom, a guide to the automation body of knowledge. That's where you get into, like, what are the, this would be, deep level for IT security or OT security individual. It's really less about security and more about the algorithms and the actual things that are taking place inside, the physics of a process that are taking place inside. And that's what we see below the Ethernet, and having an understanding or real cognitive visibility to what that is. It gives you a better sense. And that's where I came with this operational context. So if you have context to the process or the system that you're attempting to protect, I think it takes you beyond just the typical IT security measures like firewalls, access control lists, and VLANs. You can go far beyond that because you have a better understanding of what the threat vectors would be to the processes that you're trying to protect. And why does this matter in control systems? So shocking, process safety first. So if I have downstream devices that are, even within the SIS, if I have downstream devices that are below the Ethernet line, have I fully taken part in protecting the safety instrumented systems that are there to protect either an individual, group, or a community within whatever the process is that's in operation? It's water, oil and gas, a nuclear facility, what have you. But it's making sure that that our asset management program takes into account that we know what all the assets are, so that safety above all else is fully visible, and that we know what those are. Productivity, fault instrumentation effects, uptime and throughput, reliability, non-IP assets are viable targets, or physical layer logic manipulation. And again, as I said at the top, usually when we're getting below the Ethernet line, and the school of thought is if it's below the network, then there's less of a threat vector other than physical access, which can be true, but that doesn't remove the possibility of component degradation, divergence, or deviation over time. And at least if I'm monitoring below that line and I can see what those assets there and I'm able to pull them back, maybe I can have some predictive analytics that could be taking place, or at least if I have to react in a timely fashion to an event or an incident, I have all the information in front of me as to what's going on in that process at that facility. And that could be, I could be a lead engineer, and I could be thousands of miles away from that facility that I'm supporting. And who are the boots on the ground are, I need to be able to deliver accurate and timely information to those folks. And if all it is IP connected asset inventories and nothing of what's connected downstream, or I'm not able to pull in some of that field bus information, then even the response times, which could mean dollars or thousands of dollars or millions of dollars in an incident response, is going to be haphazard, or it's certainly not going to be as effective as it could be. And then obviously security and compliance. Full asset inventory is a prerequisite for most of the controls frameworks or standards or guidance that's out there, whether it's NIST 882, could be NIST CSF, bits and pieces of IT, and then certainly ISA IEC 62443. And then a couple of notes, and you can see in the table, this is not complicated information to take a look at. We're looking at visibility, discovery methods, and inventory accuracy. And some of the problems, field bus and serial comms are missed. We've talked about that. Requires field bus protocol awareness. If it's a active discovery of IP, can it peer into the PLC? And then your inventory accuracy is either partial or incomplete at best. So I think it's important to have those. Let's see here. Non-IP devices become operational risk to be handled by the operations team. Yes, that can take place. But I think, as I'll show, that being able to have as security programs. Let's see here. Speakers. Would you like to shift to your? I'm getting a notification here on the screen. Shift to my new microphone. Can everybody hear me still? Get a thumbs up from someone. I just want to make sure I am coming. Okay, perfect. All right. At a USB notification.
Yes, but your video is off.
Oh, my video is off. All right, let me see.
Yeah.
Here. Let's see if we get that turned back on. All right. Video is back on. Screen is still sharing. Perfect. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. So, operations team. But what we'll do is we'll talk about what an asset management program can do very shortly, like next couple of slides. So what we want to do to improve and scale that OT asset management, what would be nice to do is be able to shift from spreadsheets and documentation to real-time, accurate, reliable asset information. We want to combine passive network scans, active network discovery for field bus, and optimal visibility checks and balances, and then digitally mapping those processes and communication paths, getting into process and asset dependencies, so that as we're communicating to the operations team, or if the chief information security officer is responsible for the security program, and part of that is incident response do we have? Is everybody singing from the same sheet of music? And we'll take a look at that on the next slide. And finally, support for engineering tool integration. So a lot of times you'll have organizations such as Rockwell, Allen Bradley, Siemens, and Schneider will have other software solutions that can, through APIs, deliver or exchange back and forth asset inventory information, which can be very valuable. So, and what is interesting is across numerous industries and even at the global level, there are organizations, large and small, that continue to deal with the challenges that come with just the basics for asset management, right? So it's something that is not just to a certain segment or population within the OT space. It is shared in a variety of ways by folks across the board. So if we start to kind of pull this together and say, hey, what does success look like, right? So we've talked about some of the problems. Asset inventories are accurate, are not accurate or consistent. There's missed opportunities for continuous improvement. It could be investments in legacy systems where it's possible. Assets and operations are not optimized to the mission, and risks to operations are not visible or managed appropriately. And what we want to do is assign some of those goals, right? We want to align goals and objectives based on mission, have a complete asset visibility and risk analysis that we can trust and make decisions upon, identify mission essential function and process, and to determine measurement and metrics for success, as well as develop test and incident and response and recovery plans, which we've talked about as we've gone through this, and how that's very important from an accurate assessment program. And then we see what that solution starts to look like, where it's change management, risk analysis, installation, deployment, monitoring and reporting against those assets all the way up and down the stack, patch and maintain, retire and dispose, and then back and around. But as we're pulling this all together, and this is where one of the questions was talking about, non-IP devices operational handled by the operations team. So operations and engineering armed with, so I can have one asset management program that is able to be able to be distributed and disseminated to multiple groups who are now all looking at the same information, but able to make decisions based on their individual areas of expertise or what their focus is. So system safety, productivity, reliability, operations, and engineering is looking at that. The information that's delivered can give business leadership risk acceptance levels. So if I'm able to understand what my true risks are, then I can adjust what our risk acceptance levels are, which then lends itself to what are the investments that we're going to make and where's the money that we're going to save based on some of the risk tolerance and the risk acceptance that we have. And then what does our profitability look like? So the business is able to be in lockstep with operations as well as information technology, who's then going to be taking a look at the data integrity and the security and potentially the compliance if a lot of this falls under the chief information security officer or derivative, or maybe if it's the CFO. There was a report from the 2025 Fortinet OT Cybersecurity report that had come out, saw some of those shifts occurring where it was the CFO as well as the CISO. And while operations has a seat at the table, a lot of the security and the compliance and the regulatory or the contractual obligations are falling to other parties to ensure that they're crossing the T's and dotting the I's from a compliance framework or guidance perspective, and also where insurance may be a consideration. So when you're applying for your cybersecurity insurance, and now insurance organizations have become acutely aware of the nature of critical infrastructure. Another individual on this particular space, if you don't follow him already on LinkedIn, Jerry Kennedy, Gerry, is a very staunch proponent of this, and puts out a lot of information on LinkedIn in terms of what OT and critical infrastructure looks like from the insurance industry and from that perspective. So we're able to make a lot of these um, business decisions because we're rolling this all in and we're able to get there. And the particular link here from infotech.com, you'll see what the original, it was really the hardware asset management program. And I reused that. So I do want to give them credit for it. And I reused it and kind of reworked it because I thought it was as close as we could get to what does an all-encompassing kind of AMP or asset management program really look like as it feeds and disseminates that information. So now what I want to do is just take a little bit of time here and just kind of throw together what we have in these final minutes and say, okay, this is what this could look like. Obviously, this is a very, very small, situation here. I do want to get, let's see here, we got a question. How do you consider procurement process as the input? So we could probably do an entire session on supply chain, right? So is it so there's Chinese transformers here in the U.S. Do we have to worry about embedded communications that are going back to the CCP? It could be the lack of security by design that may be going into device manufacturing. Could we get to a point where control systems actually have integrated authentication and authorization and encryption as part of that? I think a lot of control systems manufacturers are moving in that direction. Supply chain from a parts and availability. So as we're identifying our risk, what's the availability of parts? And especially when something goes out of, end of life, end of support, and end of manufacture, what is it that you're going to do? So eBay becomes the supply chain for a lot of situations like that, where folks will just buy up whatever they can't get a hold of anymore if they have legacy architecture within their OT systems and processes. And then how is the organization managing that appropriately? So supply chain has all kinds of, real different kind of vectors there when you're talking about supply chain and how we're handling procurement. Tools and recommendation for real-time asset inventory. So we'll get into that in a second. I'll actually show you some interfaces. I wanted to keep this somewhat agnostic, but within the session, I can offer up some, and I've already mentioned a couple of them indirectly. So here's our control system. So now, and we just do an immediate deployment, right? So, and I wanted to kind of shorten this up. Usually I progress this through a series of slides, but what we'd have is a primary node, which you can see there in the upper left-hand corner. That primary node can have remote nodes that are connected to it and feeding information. The most important thing to see here is on that left side where that plant facility production node, it is overseeing a process. That's what that shaded blue is meant to do. Is I have a distributed asset inventory management architecture. The primary node and the remote nodes are pulling in information, and it could be capturing on endpoints, networks, broadcast traffic. We could also be pulling that in, off of passive discovery on span ports. Even cost-effective solutions such as Zeek, Elastic, and Kibana. I wonder if I'm sharing the screen. Let me see if I can. I think I've got it running actually in the background. Right. So this is, and then behind me, I've got these, PLCs in these systems, and if everybody can see this. So this is a Zeek, Kibana, and Elastic deployment that is sitting on span ports that I can use as a check and balance against my asset inventory. So I can have passive scanning, active real-time scanning. I can pull that data up, and then I can double check or at least get to a source of truth on some of that information and that capability. Let's see if I get back to here. So there's different ways to pull in that inventory, be very practical and cost effective. But then for the field bus, you can see down there in the lower left-hand corner, field bus asset communication is collected from the network connected devices. So there is a dependency on that. We'd be able to scale this out. So we'll make a brief stop for some of those organizations that are multinational, multi-global. You'd be able to scale this out. You could have different hubs based on regions of activity. So it's North America, Central South America, Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and in Asia Pac and Australia. You could have these things all feeding up, be able to pull this reporting together at scale. And then this would be an example. So there are several in the industry right now that are able to query a network device, identify that it's an OT asset, and pull that in, and then be able to query down. So one of those, these come from the Landsweeper OT scanner interface. I think OT Base does much of that. Ralph Langner's organization, and then the goal is to be able to pull this information and then pull up what is happening below, because they are field bus aware and can interrogate or investigate those systems, and then they can give you what that bus config looks like, along with the modules across that backplane, right? So this is an asset inventory, drilling into the asset information and then getting to the asset detail. And then now let's take a quick look at what that looks like digitized, right? So here's an asset deployment example. It's a Control-Logix. And then what does that look like inside the interface? Well, I have the real-time view of that bus, and then I'm able to see from the device net interface, that downstream PLC that's connected there, and I'm also able to see those Flex IO or those remote IO components. And now I've got visibility, and these are carried in the asset inventory. I can see revision numbers. I can see software information. I can start to make more concise determination across my asset inventory. And as we were talking about before, that can feed IT, it can feed the business leadership and management, and it can feed operations, and everyone is singing from the same sheet. And then we can now get to the risk analysis, because there's risk insights. And and I know OT Base and Landsweeper do this respectively, others do it as well. But then being able to take those risk insights based on the assets that you're collecting, and it can feed into your risk assessment, your risk analysis, and then now you've got more of a comprehensive information, or at least a balance of information, and you're making decisions that are sound, and your data is not either inaccurate or partially there, right? Which is for decision makers, and even for asset owners, process owners, and for IT. If we don't have all the information, then a lot of our conclusions are by nature inconclusive. And then here, what are the key outcomes for the business, for the OT and operations, and for IT? We want to have a unified asset visibility across all of our OT environments. Everyone's looking at the same information, pull that together collectively. That's the power and the strength of an improved and scalable asset management program that is field bus aware, and we're able to automate and pull that in, because you can't just send folks out to the field every time you want to take a look at something. It's untenable, it's unscalable, especially with the size of growth that we're seeing in the MENA region alone, not to mention in the US as well as in Europe, and in the Asia Pacific. Improved operational awareness and process integrity, and stronger, more resilient security, context-aware risk management, because now we're pulling up that investigated or interrogated devices below the Ethernet line. We're bringing that into part of those risk insights and that risk assessment. And then executive level insights for that risk performance. Where are we going to invest the dollars in improvement? So if we've ever been in a situation where we're trying to approach management, or we're having a board meeting, and we say, these are the investments that we need to provide. Well, now from a risk perspective, you change it from asking money to simply producing, here are the risks of the organization, which ones do you want to mitigate, and which risks are you willing to accept based on our assets and the risks that those present to the organization. So whether it's supply chain and replacing or upgrading legacy systems, if it's investing in solutions and tools that will protect IP connected data, if it's being able to monitor out of band or serial band, could be RS-232, RS-485 for anomalies, so that we can see predictive failures and drift or deviation in our metrics and our measurements, or see if somebody is altering the data. Again, one of the manufacturers of that equipment is a company called Synalytica that can sit in line and be able to pull back to a management interface all the behavior of the serial communications or the real-time communications. And then the last slide I have here is we bring this to a conclusion. I know this is probably a lot. Hopefully not everyone's drinking through a fire hose. I have a very good friend of mine is Dr. Sean Costigan. He's operating partner at Blue Edge Ventures, and teaches at the George C. Marshall Institute for U.S. and NATO forces on cyber, and does a lot in policy on securing critical infrastructure. And we were in a roundtable in a discussion. And he said the euphemism here is the level of sophistication, or we were compromised by sophisticated threat actors, and we feel that, or we hear that a lot. And then I don't know if anyone's seen the first Iron Man, but the line where Tony Stark was able to do this in a cave with a box of scraps. Well, the reality is a lot of the threat actors that we see today are moderately sophisticated, right? They're taking what we're giving them, open systems, open ports via Shodan IO, Census, or ZoomEye, not having all of our assets cataloged correctly, not making sound decisions. So for a zero trust era, we seem to be trusting an awful lot, and we really need to dive in. And a lot of times the euphemism then is, I'm embarrassed to say, and usually what follows is, we didn't do the basics. So a lot of times it's the basics that can protect the processes, protect the assets, protect safety, productivity, and reliability, and ultimately the organization, the entity, or in the case of power, water, oil and gas, assisting the marketplace or the surrounding communities, groups, or individuals. So that's it, folks. I appreciate it. I think we're at time. I tried to get it all in. Hopefully this has been very useful for everyone, and I really want to thank everybody's attendance. Great session overall. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was really interesting session, especially the part where you have shared about the MENA trends and the PLC you have showed previously. We
Yes.
have so many questions at the background. If you could answer one or two, or I could
Yep.
send them directly to your email, and you can send me the response and I can share it with the attendees.
Yeah, so one of them here, so how are non-IP assets discovered in IT environments at level 4 or above? So it all starts, and I think we were talking about that, where it's the IP, anything that's downstream and connected. So it would start with an IP connected PLC, and let's say beneath that PLC there were slave PLCs on DeviceNet or ControlNet, or downstream, as we had in the example, so FlexIO. So there would be that requirement for something that is network connected that is then presiding over the field bus. That's how we would get to a field bus aware tool or solution that's able to interrogate below that Ethernet line and pull back that information. If you have field bus operations that are air gapped or not even network connected, then you are into a control panel that is your line of defense is physical access control, and there is going to be a bit of a manual input in towards your asset management program, simply because right now you wouldn't have anything that could connect to that to be able to pull that in. Suggest some OEM tools, discovery assets. So we talked about that. What are your recommended tools? Yep, we brought up a few of those. ServiceNow and feedback. All right, so ServiceNow, I know that because ServiceNow has a lot of market share, that you're starting to see where the asset the IT and OT asset solutions that are out there are building in APIs to be able to feedback or exchange information with ServiceNow. So that's an excellent question because of ServiceNow's market share and install base is that be if I didn't have an inventory asset solution chosen yet, and part of the criteria that I'm measuring that against, what's a tool that works for me, I'd want to see if that manufacturer of that tool has either existing or on the roadmap a ServiceNow integration, especially for large organizations that have a ServiceNow deployment. It can be very advantageous to be able to have that information coming in. Let's see, one other one here. Let's see, so which software are you using for the same? Okay, yep, we got that. Do you think, okay, Idaho Lab for asset discovery, asset management, we need to consider level 3. I think we kind of talked about that. Okay, how do you think the influence of AI is going to affect asset management? So this will be, I think it's a good question. I'll try to be brief here, and then I think this will be the last question we take, just in interest of time. So in the next couple of weeks, I'll be giving a presentation at a cybersecurity summit here in the U.S. on AI's impact for OT. I believe that when we're talking about, so think about a large language model and be able to take large amounts of information that's generally available and being able to sift through that. So if I had an asset management tool and coupled that with a risk analysis tool, and that was part of my asset management program, if I can feed into the AI, here's my entire install base, an accurate inventory of all of my assets, hardware revisions, software revisions, firmware revisions, network connectivity, field bus devices, and then these are, let's say, the risk criteria or the risk analysis that I need to perform against. And AI can do what a practitioner such as myself or many others could do, but it could potentially take us hours to be able to do that. I think the real advantage to AI is being able to take the balance of information, a mountain of data that exists, and be able to sift through that, collate it, correlate it, and identify where risks are, where upgrades need to take place. It's basically doing what would take a team, and it can do it in minutes to seconds to minutes. And I think that's the real value, at least what we know of AI on the outset. I think there's a lot of hype that comes around AI when you're considering the OT space, but I think AI integrations where it's combing through mountains of data and then feeding back relevant information. It could be based on local historian data, SCADA log system, distributed control systems, log system information, because there's just so much to have to go through. The real value in AI is doing what entire teams can do in days and doing it in seconds and minutes, and then getting to its human counterpart relevant information that is actionable and needs to be identified, or at least the risks need to be determined and then either accepted, tolerated, or mitigated.
Thank you so much, Paul. It